Harris believes everything you thought you knew about history is only the surface. An alien claimed to have observed the wise men follow the star at Jesus' birth, and what he saw changes everything. Not kings, not prophecy, but a precise signal, a consciousness anchor that humanity was never meant to misunderstand. What if the story you learned in books was only a shadow of a deeper truth, hidden to protect the pattern, the technology, and the process that could awaken anyone paying attention? Tonight, you are invited to see it through the eyes of Zorion, a silent observer who documented what no human ever could. Share this journey with someone curious. Leave a mark by subscribing to Explore the Hidden, and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. What comes next is not just a story, it is a map to remembering your own latent potential. Stay with us as we unravel the journey of the Magi, the star, and the signal that was never meant for spectacle, only recognition. Your understanding of history, faith, and human capability will never be the same. Step closer, listen carefully, and let the pattern begin to unfold. The story of the star has been told so many times that it feels harmless. A soft light in the sky, a sign of hope, a poetic detail added to make the birth of Jesus feel holy and safe. I believe that version too. Most people do. It fits neatly inside faith and tradition and does not demand many questions. But what I was told later made that image impossible to hold. History calls it a star because humans lacked language for what it truly was. Stars do not change direction. They do not pause. They do not respond to observers. And yet this phenomenon did all of those things. It appeared suddenly. It moved with intention. It aligned itself not with constellations, but with geography. Someone was watching. Someone understood. His name is Zorion. He is not human. He never claimed to be a god, or an angel, or anything meant to inspire worship. He described himself as an observer, a witness assigned to monitor rare events in developing civilizations. According to him, Earth had been studied quietly for thousands of years. Most eras passed without note. This one did not. Zorion told me the night the star appeared, the planet changed. Not symbolically, but measurably. Something new entered the field of human consciousness. A coherence so precise that it stood out against the usual noise of fear, survival, and chaos. To trained observers, it was unmistakable. To untrained eyes, it became a light in the sky. What disturbed me most was his certainty. He did not speculate. He did not theorize. He spoke as someone describing weather already measured. The event was anticipated, but the timing surprised even them. The signal arrived stronger than projected. Stable. Anchored. Intentional. Religious stories describe shepherds and angels. Zorion described instruments calibrating, frequencies locking into place. A planetary system briefly aligning with something older and more precise than myth. The language was clinical, but the implication was not. I asked why this truth never survived. He said humans protect what they fear by turning it into story. A miracle feels safer than a mechanism. Worship is easier than responsibility. That night, the sky was not announcing a savior. It was marking an arrival. And humanity was never taught how to recognize it or prepare for what followed next. In complete silence, alone together watching endlessly, still forever unresolved, unanswered now. Once the event passed, it did not vanish. It lingered like pressure in the collective mind. Stories began immediately, not as lies, but as attempts to make sense of something too large. Humans reached for metaphor because mechanism would have demanded change. Belief is comforting. Understanding is dangerous. Zorion explained that the first accounts were precise. Early witnesses spoke of movement, timing, and alignment. They described fear, not reverence. Confusion, not certainty. But as generations passed, those details were softened. Precision became poetry. Observation became revelation. Anything that suggested process was replaced with mystery. Sacred language did not destroy the truth, it protected people from it. If the event had been preserved accurately, it would have implied that consciousness could be cultivated, replicated, and eventually surpassed. That possibility threatened every structure built on hierarchy, mediation, and control. Power depends on distance. The moment people believe access is internal, authority collapses. Zorion said something that stayed with me. He said humans do not erase inconvenient truths. They bury them beneath reverence. What cannot be denied is sanctified. Once sanctified, it is no longer questioned. Scripture was not written to deceive. It was written to stabilize. As teaching spread, leaders faced a choice. Either present the birth as a repeatable pattern or as a singular miracle. A pattern empowers individuals. A miracle creates dependence. The decision shaped centuries. The star became a symbol. The child became unreachable. The process became forbidden. This was not done by villains. It was done by frightened men trying to hold collapsing worlds together. Empires were fragile. Populations volatile. To suggest that humans could access divine coherence without intermediaries would have dissolved borders overnight. Order required containment. Zorion observed councils, debates, edits, and omissions. He watched language bend slowly. Nothing dramatic. No conspiracy in a room. Just small adjustments. A sentence softened here. A cause removed there. Over time, the story lost its teeth. What survived was safe. Angels, songs, and destiny. What disappeared was instruction. How to recognize the signal. How to prepare the body and mind. How to sustain coherence without destroying oneself. Those parts were deemed dangerous. Scripture did not lie. It distracted. It guided attention away from method and toward worship. And in doing so, it ensured survival of belief at the cost of understanding. The truth did not die. It went dormant, a time when humanity could face responsibility alone. Zorion did not arrive the way stories expect visitors to arrive. There was no descent, no announcement, no interruption of history. He was already here long before names were carved into stone. Long before belief learned to organize itself. He existed alongside humanity unnoticed, because observation requires distance, not dominance. According to him, his kind does not intervene unless extinction is imminent. They document. They record shifts in awareness patterns, moments when a species either fractures or advances. Earth was categorized as volatile but promising. Most cycles ended the same way, with fear outweighing coherence. This one did not. Zorion described himself not as an individual in the human sense, but as a role carried across long spans of time. One consciousness, wearing continuity. Watching civilizations rise, attempt alignment, and collapse back into fragmentation. He never guided leaders, never whispered answers. Influence contaminates data. What separated his account from mythology was restraint. He never claimed importance. He never positioned himself above the event. He spoke as someone who stood still, while history moved past him, unaware. The birth was not special because of who observed it. It was special because it registered beyond Earth. Zorion explained that consciousness leaves signatures just like matter does. When enough coherence gathers in one location, it becomes visible to those trained to detect it. Most humans never notice, because their internal noise overwhelms perception. His kind evolved beyond that limitation. He watched early humans learn language, form families, invent gods, invent enemies, invent meaning. He watched cycles repeat. But the night of the signal was different. Not louder but cleaner. Not dramatic but stable. It did not demand attention. It allowed it. He was careful to clarify something that unsettled me. He was not assigned to the child. He was assigned to the shift. The child was one node in a larger pattern. A focal point, not a center. That distinction mattered. Zorion never spoke of destiny. He spoke of probability windows. He never spoke of salvation. He spoke of potential trajectories. His presence was not endorsement, it was documentation. What frightened me most was not his age or his origin. It was his patience. He waited centuries without frustration, watched truths distort without interference. Because interference would have changed the outcome. He said, observers exist so that when a civilization is ready, the record can surface intact, not as command, not as belief, as remembrance. And when he finally spoke to me, it was not because I was chosen. It was because the pattern had begun to reappear, and someone needed to know what had already happened once before. Zorian said the change did not announce itself with spectacle. There was no explosion of light, no rupture in the sky, no sound heard by human ears. From the ground, it was an ordinary night, like countless others. Wind moved through dry grass, animals settled into sleep, and cities dimmed as lamps were extinguished. Yet beyond human perception, something altered with absolute clarity. Earth carried a familiar noise pattern. Survival, fear, reproduction, dominance cycles layered endlessly. To observers, this noise formed a predictable background hum. On that night, the hum thinned. A narrow band of coherence appeared inside it, precise and sustained. Not chaotic, not emotional, not desperate, stable. Zorian described watching instruments register the anomaly. At first, it resembled a statistical error, a fluctuation too clean to belong to organic systems. But it did not fade. It strengthened gradually, as if adjusting itself to the planet rather than forcing entry. That was the moment confirmation arrived. The signal originated from a single region. Small, geographically insignificant, politically irrelevant. Yet the coherence radiated outward, subtly influencing nearby systems. Animals responded first. Nervous systems softened. Aggression diminished briefly. Humans felt unease without knowing why. Zorian said this was not implantation. Nothing was inserted into humanity. Something latent was activated. A dormant capacity briefly aligned and held. The coherence did not override free will. It demonstrated possibility. What made the moment historic was restraint. Most advanced civilizations announced their transitions with dominance. This one whispered. It asked permission through resonance rather than command. That choice mattered. Zorian watched others of his kind take notice. Records updated. Probabilities recalculated. A threshold had been crossed. Earth was no longer merely observed for collapse potential. It was flagged for emergence. The coherence lasted long enough to anchor, not long enough to destabilize existing systems. A perfect margin. After that, the background noise slowly returned. Fear resumed. Power structures remained intact. From the inside, nothing seemed changed. But to those who watched, it was irreversible. A reference point had been established. A human nervous system had sustained coherence without breaking. The implications were vast. Zorian said that night marked the first successful alignment between human biology and higher-order consciousness. Not perfection, not completion, proof. History would remember it as a star. Zorian remembered it as a signal. And the planet has been quietly echoing that frequency ever since, waiting for recognition again now. What humans later called a star was never fixed in the sky. Zorian was clear about this. Stars obey gravity, fusion, distance. This phenomenon obeyed intention. It appeared where it needed to be and adjusted as conditions changed. To observers trained in celestial mechanics, its behavior immediately disqualified it from natural classification. The light did not blaze. It refined itself. A narrow, luminous presence tuned to visibility thresholds. Bright enough to be seen by those looking for it. Subtle enough to fade into insignificance for those who were not. It neither demanded attention nor concealed itself completely. Choice was preserved even in observation. Zorian explained that the signal used light only as a translation layer. Humans understand light as guidance, direction, Meaning, the phenomenon exploited that familiarity. Beneath the visible layer existed structure, alignment, and calibration processes invisible to the eye. What mattered was not how it looked, but how it behaved. The movement was deliberate. It did not drift. It repositioned. It paused when observers paused. It advanced when they advanced, always remaining slightly ahead, never pulling, never pushing, leading without commanding. This was its most important feature. Random stars do not wait. They do not respond to terrain weather or human hesitation. This signal adjusted constantly, maintaining coherence with those tracking it. That interaction alone confirmed design. Zorion said the signal served two purposes simultaneously. For the observers, it marked an anchor point already established. For the Magi, it functioned as a navigational interface, guiding them through unfamiliar geography while testing their interpretive discipline. Those who sought dominance would lose it. Those who sought understanding would follow. The phenomenon never pointed to power centers. It avoided palaces, temples, and cities. It refined its position toward simplicity, obscurity, and safety. This confused those expecting grandeur. That confusion filtered observers naturally. Zorion emphasized that the signal was not external instruction. It did not tell anyone what to believe. It responded to alignment. When alignment faltered, it dimmed. When clarity returned, it stabilized. This taught without words. Over time, stories simplified the behavior. Movement became magic. Alignment became miracle. Intention became myth. Humans replaced mechanism with wonder, because wonder absolves responsibility. But Zorion remembered the precision, the patience, the restraint. The signal did exactly what it was designed to do and nothing more. It guided those capable of following without ever forcing belief. And when its purpose was complete, it withdrew without farewell, leaving behind only memory, confusion, and a question humanity is still avoiding today. The men who followed the star were not kings in the sense most imagine. Zorion insisted on this. Titles did not matter to those trained to read patterns. They were scholars, navigators, observers of the heavens. Their lineage was one of method, not inheritance. They carried instruments, charts, and protocols designed to decode anomalies in celestial and energetic systems. Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar were names assigned to them much later. To Zorion, they were points in a network, three nodes capable of perceiving what most humans could not. They understood light, not as beauty, but as data. They observed direction, frequency, intensity, and timing. They measured consistency and adjusted their own perception to maintain alignment with it. Zorion described the preparation that preceded their journey. Months, if not years, of study, meditation, and calculation to ensure that nothing distracted interpretation. The star's behavior demanded patience. One false assumption and the signal could have been lost entirely. Unlike human faith, which responds to hope and expectation, theirs responded to calibration and attention. They were not seeking power or reward. They were responding to recognition. To see the pattern was to act. Their instruments captured changes invisible to ordinary eyes. Shadows, reflections, atmospheric interference were all accounted for. Zorion said the Magi's ability to sustain coherence with the signal was as rare as the signal itself. Most who attempted to follow would have been misled by natural anomalies, exhausted by uncertainty, or distracted by desire for prestige. He emphasized their discipline. Their eyes did not wander to spectacle. Their minds did not wander to legend. They mapped and projected. They tested assumptions against reality constantly. The star adjusted to their fidelity. The phenomenon was responsive, selective, and precise. Those who failed to maintain alignment simply lost track of it entirely. Zorion said that the Magi's journey was not linear. Nights were spent observing, days recalculating, landscapes crossing in silence. The star's light functioned as a guide, not a promise. Humans would later transform this into pilgrimage, procession, and homage. The signal did not recognize ceremony. It recognized coherence. By the time they arrived at their destination, they were no longer three men seeking a child. They were three observers who had passed an initiation few would survive. Their perception of the sky had expanded. Their understanding of causality and attention had shifted. What they followed was not a legend. It was a deliberate alignment of consciousness with the extraordinary hidden pattern that Zorian had been watching for millennia. The Magi did not follow prophecy. Zorian insisted on this repeatedly. They followed patterns, signals, shifts in coherence that betrayed something beyond ordinary human perception. To them, the star was not a symbol or a sign of divine favor. It was data, a moving index of planetary alignment and consciousness potential. Zorian explained that humanity is blind to most energetic markers. Civilizations interpret what they can see through fear, desire, or story. The Magi were trained to observe beyond those limits. Their eyes read resonance, their calculations measured subtle deviations, their instruments detected harmonics invisible to the untrained. When the star appeared, it was not miraculous in their terms. It was a confirmation. They understood the rarity of the event. Alignment of planetary fields, solar patterns, and human receptivity had to converge precisely. Each cycle presented possibilities. Most were ignored or misread. This one had registered perfectly. Consciousness had formed an anchor strong enough to stabilize the emergent field. That anchor was not the child alone, but the convergence he represented. Zorian emphasized that the Magi's comprehension was dangerous knowledge in human terms. To recognize a consciousness anchor is to realize that the rules of influence and awareness are not fixed, that one system can resonate with another in ways invisible to the ordinary eye. To recognize it and fail to act is catastrophic. To act without preparation is equally catastrophic. They had preparation. They had discipline. The star guided them, not by whim but by alignment with that anchor. Every movement of the light corresponded to probability windows. Every pause tested perception. The Magi interpreted not by guesswork but by calibration. They did not falter when the signal dimmed or shifted slightly. They anticipated the changes because their understanding extended beyond observation into the patterns of coherence itself. Zorian noted something curious. The men carried no weapons, no treasure, no pretense of kingship. They traveled with clarity of purpose. They understood that misalignment could be fatal not just to themselves but to the signal. The star was sensitive to resonance, not ceremony. Only those attuned could follow without disrupting its integrity. By the time they neared the location, Zorian said, they had ceased to be mere observers. They had become conduits. Each calculation, adjustment, and correction refined the trajectory of consciousness itself. They were not chasing history or legend. They were maintaining a connection with a pattern the world would forget, a truth encoded in motion and light that only the patient, disciplined, and perceptive could ever understand. As the journey stretched across mountains, deserts, and rivers, the Magi felt subtle shifts within themselves. Zorian observed these changes with meticulous attention. Their dreams deepened in vividness, showing patterns and symbols they had never seen before. Nights became periods of reflection rather than rest. Each rest period revealed fragments of understanding previously inaccessible. Sleep itself aligned with the rhythm of the signal. Emotions that once flared in reaction to frustration or fear now tempered into quiet observation. Irritation at terrain or weather diminished. Doubt transformed into measured analysis. Even moments of exhaustion revealed clarity rather than confusion. Zorian noted that this was not fatigue in the human sense. The body remained taxed, but the mind expanded, integrating information from both environment and perception simultaneously. Time became malleable. Days seemed longer yet compressed. They could recall events from hours ago with the clarity of memory decades old. Decisions that would normally take careful debate emerged almost instantly. Informed by intuition Zorion described as resonance with the signal itself. Their cognition tuned to the subtle fluctuations of light and energy emanating from the phenomenon. The journey was not just physical. Zorion said it was a calibration. The Magi were unknowingly harmonizing their consciousness with the anchor the star represented. Each step aligned their internal patterns with the external coherence. Misalignment produced mild disorientation. Alignment produced insight. By the third week of travel, their perception of cause and effect had shifted. Events that would normally appear random now revealed a subtle logic. Zorion described the moment their transformation became visible to an external observer, not in outward behavior, not in gesture, but in the precision of attention. Each action, whether setting camp, adjusting instruments, or observing the night sky, carried the weight of awareness exceeding ordinary human limitation. The signal responded to their fidelity. When they faltered, the light dimmed slightly. When they recalibrated, it brightened and moved with them. He observed that these changes were irreversible. Once the mind adapted to perceive the pattern, there was no return to previous limitation. Humanity had conditioned itself to forget subtle harmonics. The Magi were now attuned to them. Zorion noted with quiet satisfaction that this attunement was both gift and responsibility. The journey altered them in ways human history would misinterpret as devotion or faith. In truth, it was the beginning of consciousness, learning to recognize coherence for the first time in millennia. Herod did not see the star. He did not read charts or follow celestial anomalies. Yet the disturbance reached him before it reached anyone else. Zorion observed this with interest. Power carries its own frequency, a resonance that registers shifts even when the mind has no words for them. The palace, filled with gilded walls and guarded corridors, quivered in anticipation long before the Magi arrived. The king's intuition functioned like a crude instrument. Subtle vibrations of expectation, fear, and possibility threaded through the city, vibrating the tapestries and the floors, echoing through servants' movements. Advisors and priests noticed it first as unease. Decisions felt heavier, words seemed inadequate. A collective sense of misalignment settled over the halls. Even the air seemed thicker. Zorion said that fear was a pattern. It formed a protective field around power. It amplified small anomalies into crises. Herod felt the approaching coherence of the star as a disruption to the equilibrium of control. The same signal that guided the Magi simultaneously disturbed those attuned to domination rather than observation. The disturbance was invisible yet undeniable. Rumors spread faster than reason. Courtiers whispered of omens and disturbances in the heavens. Dreams of unrest, nightmares vivid and improbable, unsettled the palace. The guards noticed nervous glances and hurried footsteps without apparent cause. Herod alone understood the danger beneath the surface of these signs. Zorion noted that the intensity of his anxiety grew proportionally to the alignment unfolding outside. The king summoned priests and astrologers seeking counsel. They offered interpretations filtered through expectation and fear. None could read the signal directly. They spoke of comets, prophecies, celestial wrath. Yet the explanations only magnified the urgency. Herod's mind, however, bypassed words. He understood that the signal represented agency outside his control. That realization ignited a subtle but powerful fear, not for his life alone, but for his legacy, his dominion. The order he believed immutable. Zorion remarked that the palace itself became a container for that fear. It thickened the air around Herod, creating a gravitational field of dread. Decisions were made preemptively. Orders whispered, plans drafted, contingencies considered long before the Magi had arrived. The signal had already altered the course of events. Human history, Zorian observed, would later record Herod's paranoia as folly. In truth, it was recognition. The first acknowledgement that some forces move beyond the reach of kings, that some coherence cannot be owned, only witnessed. The birth did not occur in a palace or a place of grandeur. Zorian made this clear. Humanity's imagination later clothed it in stable, hay, and animals, but those details were incidental. The location mattered not for convenience or ritual. It mattered for alignment. High-frequency coherence cannot manifest where ego asserts dominance. It cannot flourish under scrutiny of those attuned to power, spectacle, or ambition. The phenomenon that had arrived required containment. It required quiet. Zorian observed that the choice of obscurity was deliberate. The energy signature that anchored to the newborn could not survive exposure to reactive frequencies. Curiosity, desire, fear, and expectation create distortions. They scatter potential. Even the noblest intention can disrupt delicate coherence. The location needed to provide shelter not just physically but energetically. It needed to remain hidden from interference, both conscious and unconscious. The Magi understood this, though they had no words for it at the time. Their instruments, their intuition, their attunement to resonance indicated the same necessity. They approached with caution, aware that the signal could diminish or vanish entirely if observed incorrectly. The birth itself became a quiet calibration, an event designed to integrate into the planetary field without destabilizing it. It was precise, restrained, almost imperceptible in its appearance. Zorian explained that the moment of birth aligned not only with planetary energy but also with emotional receptivity. The human mind, when calm, can resonate with frequencies otherwise inaccessible. Excessive fear, noise, or spectacle interrupts this. Obscurity was protection, allowing the newborn to anchor a template for potential human consciousness without disruption. Every element of environment, light, and presence was measured against the effect it would have on coherence. He emphasized that human chronicles removed this subtlety. History records witnesses and reactions, but not the mechanics of the event. The hidden nature of the birth was misinterpreted as poverty or divine irony. In truth, it was strategy. Emotional stillness, humility, and invisibility were not incidental. They were prerequisites. Zorian observed that even animals in the stable contributed to resonance. Their calm, their ordinary rhythm, created a buffer around the signal. The human mind interprets narrative through expectation, not mechanics, and so details became myth. Zorian noted that the obscurity also shielded the newborn from early interference. Those attuned to control, domination, or fear could have altered perception and stability. Exposure to such energies at the wrong moment might have destabilized the template entirely. Obscurity was the vessel that allowed alignment to occur organically. It protected integrity while providing sufficient visibility for those trained to follow the signal. The choice of timing and location was a blueprint. Hidden, controlled, calibrated. The birth was not about ceremony. It was about frequency. A convergence of planetary resonance, human potential, and cosmic observation that required patience and vigilance. History would record the story as humble and miraculous. Zorian observed it as precise, deliberate, and necessary. A silent orchestration designed to plant a coherence that humanity would recognize only much later. Obscurity was not absence, it was protection. It was intention. And in that quiet, Zorian witnessed the alignment that would ripple outward for centuries, unnoticed by most, but perceptible to those attuned enough to follow. Miriam was not chosen by chance. Zorian observed her with precision, noting that her stability exceeded any human baseline. Her nervous system processed stress with extraordinary efficiency. Each heartbeat, each breath, maintained equilibrium under conditions that would have overwhelmed others. From conception, she carried an innate attunement, a subtle coherence that allowed her to resonate with high-frequency energies without destabilizing. Zorion emphasized that this was rare, perhaps unique in the region and era. Her emotional resilience was extraordinary. Fear, excitement, and uncertainty, the usual forces that distort perception, barely registered. Zorion described it as a buffer, a capacity to observe chaos without absorbing it. When the star appeared, when the Magi approached, when the palace trembled with Herod's unease, she maintained an internal stillness that kept the incoming signal intact. Without her capacity, the resonance could have fractured, diffused, or been lost entirely. Zorion noted that the human mind struggles to carry such coherence precisely because it requires the simultaneous presence of emotional depth and regulation. Miriam could feel without collapse, observe without interference, and respond without fear. She embodied a balance rarely achieved, a harmony between vulnerability and control. Her body, her energy, her presence all served as conduits rather than obstacles. The alien described her as a template for what a human consciousness could achieve when aligned with high-frequency coherence. Not divine in the sense of power or omniscience, but a human capable of sustaining a field that affected both planetary resonance and those around her. The birth she carried was not just of flesh, but of energetic significance. Each contraction, each breath, each subtle physiological rhythm contributed to the stabilization of a signal that had traversed centuries to arrive unnoticed and unrecognized. Zorion reflected on the subtle patterns of her awareness. Her focus was not forced. Her attention followed the flow of alignment naturally. She anticipated moments of disturbance and adjusted instinctively. When anxiety from Herod or curiosity from bystanders rose nearby, she buffered it unconsciously, maintaining the coherence of the event. The star itself responded to her presence, modulating its light and motion in subtle correspondence to her resonance. He noted that the Magi, skilled as they were, could perceive the signal, but it was Miriam who held it in place. Without her, observation alone would have been insufficient. The human vessel had to be capable of enduring and transmitting. The precision of her emotional and physiological responses created a stable field, a lattice that allowed the anchor of consciousness to embed securely in the material world. Zorion observed that history obscured her significance. Myths would cast her as passive, as recipient rather than participant. Yet her coherence was the fulcrum upon which the integrity of the entire event rested. She carried without awareness, yet with perfection, the resonance that would ripple across centuries. Without this delicate balance, the high-frequency signal would have faltered, and the alignment intended to awaken consciousness in subtle ways would have been irretrievably lost. Her presence was quiet, her power unnoticed, and yet it was absolute. Zorion called it a rare harmony, the human capacity to hold the extraordinary without collapse, and without her, nothing that followed could have occurred. Yosef was often overlooked in human accounts, a figure relegated to obedience and labor. Yet Zorion observed him as integral to the event's stability. He was not remarkable for feats of strength or eloquence, but for the subtleties of presence. His consciousness carried a weight, a grounding frequency that balanced the extraordinary resonance surrounding Miriam and the newborn. Where coherence threatened to scatter, he contained it. Where fear or uncertainty stirred, he dampened it. His function was silent, invisible to those who recorded history, but critical to the preservation of the signal. Zorion explained that human systems often underestimate the stabilizing effect of a steady observer. Yosef embodied this principle. His nervous system absorbed tension without internalizing it. His focus precise, unshakable, and yet flexible. He moved through the environment without generating disruption, a counterbalance to the high-frequency field Miriam naturally carried. The palace intrigue, the Magi's arrival, the star's subtle fluctuations. None could destabilize the energetic lattice because Yosef's presence acted as an anchor. The alien observed that grounding consciousness operates differently than resonance-based perception. While Miriam's coherence amplified and transmitted energy, Yosef's steadiness received and contained it. His attention, minute and continuous, adjusted to every disturbance. A sudden noise, a human glance steeped in suspicion, the friction of movement among animals and objects, all were met with subtle modulation. He breathed with awareness, walked with intention, and allowed the environment to resonate around him without collapsing under the weight of significance. Zorian noted that the combination of Miriam and Yosef created a rare symmetry. The anchor and the channel, stabilizer and transmitter, worked in silent orchestration. Without Miriam, the signal might have dissipated, but without Yosef, the channel could have fragmented under even the smallest external perturbation. History reduced him to a carpenter of humble skill, yet he was a conscious instrument in an alignment that extended far beyond ordinary human perception. He maintained emotional calm that mirrored environmental requirements. Where anxiety or anticipation threatened coherence, Yosef's presence mitigated its impact. He processed external energy not reactively but as a harmonizing force, translating chaotic impulses into manageable patterns. Zorian observed that this ability is rare among humans, almost always unconscious and underappreciated, yet essential when extraordinary events intersect with human perception. The alien also remarked on Yosef's relational stability. His interactions with Miriam were devoid of projection, of expectation, and full of an intuitive support that required no instruction. By simply being, he created a safe, energetic container for the arrival of the phenomenon. The Magi's presence, powerful as their attunement was, could not have compensated for the absence of this quiet anchor. In sum, Zorian described Yosef as the unseen counterpoint to the extraordinary. His grounding allowed resonance to manifest without chaos. Human accounts remembered only the dramatic, the star, the travelers, the birth, but the invisible lattice of stability, woven through silent awareness, was Yosef's gift. Without it, the coherence essential to the event's purpose would have unraveled, leaving the arrival unanchored, fleeting, and lost to history. In quiet, unrecorded moments, he ensured that alignment endured. The first breath of Yeshua passed unnoticed by human eyes, yet Zorian observed it with clarity that spanned beyond temporal and physical perception. There was no fanfare, no radiant flare, no heralding choir. The event unfolded as a subtle alignment, a microscopic locking of frequencies. A coherence so precise that only an observer, trained to perceive energetic signatures, could detect it. The moment was not celebrated because it could not be measured by spectacle, only by effect. It rippled silently, like a stone dropped into an unseen pond, and yet the influence extended far beyond the immediate vicinity. Zorian described the newborn's nervous system as an intricate lattice of potential, already resonating with a frequency that mirrored planetary subtlety. The first inhalation did not merely bring air into the lungs. It established a template. The tiny rhythm of chest and diaphragm synchronized with a broader energetic field. The surrounding environment, the animals, the walls, even the dust motes in the stable, subtly responded. Coherence, anchored not by force, but by the innate capacity of this human vessel to exist within a resonance previously unattainable. Harris reflected on the human tendency to imagine grand gestures. History often distorts events into miraculous spectacles, yet the real miracle, Zorian emphasized, was almost imperceptible. Yeshua's first breath was an energetic signature, detectable to the attuned, a calibration point for the evolution of consciousness. Zorian observed that it affected not only the immediate space but extended outward, interacting with planetary rhythms and subtle human perception in ways invisible yet enduring. The air itself, moving across the stable, carried a subtle imprint, a signature that could influence thought, perception, and future receptivity. The newborn's presence was a coherent anchor. Zorian observed that where Miriam provided stability and Yosef provided grounding, the infant supplied initiation. The breath was an interface, a bridge between dense physicality and subtle, higher frequency alignment. It was the first act of resonance, establishing a blueprint that, if preserved, could ripple across time and space. There was no drama, only precision. The Magi, sensitive as they were, perceived a shift, a subtle modulation in their instruments and intuition. They knew they were approaching not a mere infant, but a field of potential, a template of resonance that would persist long after the stable emptied. Zorian noted that human chroniclers would later overlook this. Words, narratives, and rituals could not capture the mechanics of the event. Angels and songs were poetic approximations, ways for humans to mark significance without understanding the underlying principle. Yet for those who could observe, who could perceive resonance without projection, the first breath contained a map, a pulse, a signal locked into the very fabric of local consciousness. The coherence was delicate, requiring preservation through environment, emotional stability, and alignment of all present. Each exhale, each blink, each minor motion contributed to a lattice of influence. Zorian observed and recorded, aware that the event would ripple outward unseen. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet absolute. The first breath was not an announcement, but a key, a foundational vibration that anchored possibility and set in motion a resonance that would endure far beyond what humanity would comprehend. Zorian observed the animals in the stable with acute awareness, noting that their behavior defied the simple explanations later assigned by human storytellers. There was no reverence, no recognition of divinity, yet a subtle alignment permeated the space. The sheep, the oxen, and the camels adjusted their breathing and posture in response to a frequency they could sense but not interpret. Their nervous systems, finely tuned to environmental cues, responded to coherence rather than consciousness or ceremony. Every exhale, every shift of weight, every flick of an ear was a reaction to resonance, a silent attunement to the pattern established by the presence of the newborn. The alien explained that the biological mechanisms were straightforward yet profound. Sensory neurons transmitted information about subtle electromagnetic fluctuations. The animal's instinctive awareness of energy ensured that they did not become agitated, frightened, or reactive. Instead, they mirrored stability. Zorian noted that the calm was an emergent property, not learned or imposed, and entirely unintentional. Where humans perceived awe or submission, the animals merely reflected the coherence embedded in the space. Their physiology was synchronizing to the incoming signal, a resonance that could propagate through multiple layers of living systems simultaneously. Harris reflected on how the misconception of worship arose. The later narrative assigned intentionality, anthropomorphizing instinct as spirituality. Zorian observed that humans often translate energy-based influence into meaning aligned with existing belief systems. The animals were present, interacting with the energetic field in real time, yet without consciousness of narrative, of deity, or of purpose beyond the immediate experience. The apparent calm was an elegant demonstration of interaction between living systems and high-frequency coherence. The alien emphasized that this behavior revealed a subtle truth about Yeshua's arrival. It was not the human understanding of sacredness that mattered, nor the visible gestures of recognition, but the creation of an environment capable of maintaining alignment across species. Miriam's stability, Yosef's grounding, and the newborn's first breath together produced a lattice of coherence that extended outward. Animals, previously unpredictable in behavior, became part of the emergent field. Their instinctive synchronization reinforced rather than disrupted the signal. Zorion noted the implications for planetary observation. If such coherence could ripple through multiple biological systems, it could act as a template for subtle environmental and societal influence. The Magi sensed it intuitively, recognizing the pattern in ways human language could not describe. The animal's calm became an unspoken metric, a natural barometer for the integrity of the resonance. Harris considered how this would challenge conventional interpretations. Later, human storytellers would cast the animals as witnesses to divinity, embellishing the tale with moral and religious symbolism. Yet Zorion insisted that the truth was neither allegorical nor worship-based. It was scientific in its subtlety, energetic in its mechanism, and profoundly real. The animals were not bowing, not submitting, not performing ritual. They were responding, naturally, precisely, without thought, to the presence of a coherence far beyond their usual experience. Their stillness, measured and intentional by instinct, confirmed that the signal had taken hold, that the environment was aligned, and that the process unfolding was neither myth nor magic, but a delicate orchestration of living systems, responding to resonance. The arrival of the Magi was not heralded by fanfare or ceremony, yet Zorion observed a profound shift in the field of resonance. Their footsteps, measured and deliberate across dust and stone, carried the awareness of precise calculation, of trained observation, and of anticipation. These men were not kings seeking homage, nor pilgrims seeking divinity. They were scholars attuned to celestial patterns, their instruments of mind and intuition honed to detect signals invisible to ordinary perception. Zorion noted how their approach altered the subtle coherence around the stable. Recognition does not demand bows or offerings. Recognition simply aligns. Harris reflected on the misinterpretation that would follow. History transformed their acknowledgement into awe, their analytical observation into ritual. Zorion emphasized that the Magi were not attempting to validate prophecy. They were responding to a measurable event, a deliberate anchoring of consciousness on a planet in flux. The birth they approached was not merely human. It carried a signal so coherent, so delicate, that it required attunement to notice, yet its presence could be confirmed by those who knew how to observe. Each step they took, each glance they shared, subtly reinforced the stability of the resonance already initiated by the newborn. The recognition was multi-layered. Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar perceived the alignment not only through the skies they read, but through an internal resonance. Zorion described the subtle physiological markers that indicated their attunement: heartbeat regulation, neural synchronization, subtle shifts in breath and eye focus. Their cognition operated on a threshold above the ordinary, allowing them to perceive both the energetic signature and the implications embedded within it. They did not kneel because the moment demanded submission. They acknowledged because the field demanded clarity. Recognition became an act of co-creation. Harris considered how this nuance would be lost in translation over centuries. Religious imagery would depict kings bowing to a child, embellishing devotion into spectacle. Zorion observed that such distortions obscured the true purpose. The Magi's presence served as a confirmation of coherence, a living verification that the anchoring event had taken root. Each movement, each whisper, each calculated observation contributed to the energetic lattice that now encompassed the stable. Recognition was not a ceremony. It was an energetic validation, an act of measurement beyond instruments, a testimony to the precision of what had occurred. Zorion emphasized that the Magi's understanding extended beyond the immediate space. Their alignment acted as a bridge, connecting the event to distant points, to planetary cycles, and to subtle patterns that would ripple across generations. The infant's first breath had established a template. The animals had synchronized instinctively. Now, human cognition, refined by study and attunement, confirmed the resonance. Recognition became a living mechanism, a crucial component in the preservation and propagation of the signal. Harris noted the paradox. To the casual observer, the Magi were simply visiting a child. To Zorion, and to those trained to perceive coherence, they were the first external nodes in a network of awareness. Their recognition ensured that the event did not exist in isolation. It anchored the signal across space and time. This was neither worship nor legend. It was validation, observation, and continuity, the delicate mechanics of an occurrence that would later be shrouded in myth, yet remained profoundly real to anyone capable of seeing the truth beyond human storytelling. Zorion observed the placement of the gifts with meticulous attention, noting that their function was subtle, practical, and yet entirely invisible to those untrained in the science of resonance. Gold, traditionally interpreted as a token of wealth or kingship, carried a stabilizing property at a molecular level. Its presence within the environment acted as a conductor of coherence, enhancing the retention of energetic patterns already initiated by the infant. Zorion explained that even a small amount, strategically placed, could influence neuronal firing rates in nearby beings, subtly reinforcing calm and alignment without producing any overt effect perceptible to casual observers. Frankincense, long mythologized as incense for ritual, served as a biochemical regulator within the enclosed space. Its aromatic compounds modulated the air, not merely for scent, but for their capacity to interact with olfactory receptors linked directly to the limbic system. Zorion noted that these compounds could enhance emotional stability, reduce microfluctuations of stress in caregivers, and increase receptivity to coherent signals. To the trained eye, the steadying influence of frankincense on Miriam and Yosef was measurable, a physiological response synchronized with the infant's energetic field. Myrrh, misunderstood in legend as a foreshadowing of mortality, had its own precise role. Its chemical composition acted as a neurological buffer, protecting against overstimulation and preserving the integrity of high-frequency coherence. Zorion emphasized that such compounds were neither mystical nor symbolic, but functionally designed to maintain the delicate balance necessary for the anchoring event. Each substance operated on multiple layers, influencing neural pathways, hormonal regulation, and subtle energetic interactions simultaneously. Harris reflected on the human tendency to overlay meaning where function existed. Later storytelling transformed the gifts into symbols of status, piety, or fate. Zorion explained that misinterpretation was inevitable, for the original intent was never meant to be understood outside of careful observation. The Magi, trained in planetary cycles and energetic literacy, recognized the functional value immediately. Their delivery of these items was not ritualistic homage. It was operational, a deliberate reinforcement of coherence. The alien further noted that the timing, quantity, and placement of each gift were precise. Even small deviations could have produced ripple effects, destabilizing the environment and compromising the emerging signal. Zorion had cataloged similar practices across civilizations, observing how early interventions with natural compounds and strategic placement could preserve developmental integrity during high-frequency events. The stable became a laboratory, invisible to the human eye, yet active in processes that would later shape consciousness patterns on the planet. Harris considered how this perspective reframed the story. The gifts were not offerings, they were instruments, protective measures, and functional tools in the orchestration of a larger event. Recognition of their true purpose reframed the narrative of the Nativity from mythic storytelling into subtle science. Observation, intervention, and coherence coexisted, creating an environment where Yeshua's early moments could establish the resonance necessary to ripple through generations. The Magi's understanding, combined with the gifts, ensured that the anchoring was precise, measurable, and resilient, yet invisible, a mechanism hidden within legend, silently operating beyond human comprehension, and entirely orchestrated to safeguard the emergence of a signal capable of shaping consciousness. Zorian observed the moment when caution and awareness intersected in the minds of the Magi. The warning about Herod was not delivered with spectacle or authority, but as a subtle modulation in perception, a frequency shift that suggested danger without dictating response. Harris reflected on how easily such interventions could be misinterpreted by human observers. To the untrained eye, the message became legend, transformed into angels or dreams. To Zorian, it was a precise calibration, a gentle nudge designed to preserve free will while safeguarding the continuity of a crucial event. The Magi perceived the warning not as an imperative, but as information layered within observation, a pattern emerging from the alignment of stars and internal resonance. Each of them, trained to read the heavens and attuned to energetic subtleties, sensed the anomaly in human behavior without naming it explicitly. Herod's unease, the turbulence of authority, the undercurrent of fear rippling through his court, all registered in their awareness. Zorian emphasized that these signals were not supernatural but natural indicators of threat within a social matrix. Recognition of such signals allowed for choices that respected agency while avoiding catastrophe. Harris noted the elegance of the mechanism. There was no coercion, no violation of autonomy. The Magi retained full capacity to act as they saw fit. Yet the universe provided a signal, coherent and interpretable only by those trained to perceive it. In this way, the timeline remained protected without force. Zorian explained that interference on a planetary scale was risky. Even minor intrusions could ripple unpredictably, distorting outcomes or undermining the anchoring event. The warning was a precise measure, calibrated for effect, minimal in appearance, yet sufficient to redirect human action. The decision the Magi faced was subtle but profound. They could proceed and risk exposure, or adjust their route to avoid the disturbance. Zorian observed the alignment of intention and observation, the internal deliberations that reflected both ethical consideration and practical reasoning. Harris considered how centuries of storytelling obscured this nuance. Legends would reduce the choice to obedience, mythologize the intervention as angelic command. Yet the reality, as Zorian documented, was far more intricate. Information, perception, and understanding combined to allow a conscious choice that preserved the integrity of the event and the safety of those involved. Zorian noted the energetic reverberations of the decision. Each choice, each small adaptation of route or timing, reinforced the coherence established at the birth. Free will and protective design coexisted, layered within the unfolding human experience. The warning itself became a part of the pattern, a subtle reinforcement of the field, ensuring that the anchoring of consciousness could proceed without unnecessary disruption. Harris reflected on the paradox: intervention without imposition, guidance without dominance, choice without loss of autonomy. The Magi's decision became a living testament to the delicate balance of observation and influence, a rare convergence of human reasoning and extraterrestrial insight, quietly safeguarding a signal that would resonate through time, yet remain invisible to the eyes of ordinary history. Zorian recorded the precise moment when the luminous signal ceased to be visible to human observers. Harris described it not as a vanishing or fading, but as a controlled withdrawal, an intentional modulation of coherence that allowed the environment to stabilize without drawing attention. The star, which had been a dynamic indicator of energetic alignment, remained active in frequencies imperceptible to unaided human senses, continuing to maintain the resonance necessary for the anchor without risk of external disruption. Visibility to the untrained eye would have invited speculation, interference, and potentially catastrophic misalignment. The Magi perceived the change with subtle clarity. Their training allowed them to recognize not only the arrival of the signal, but also its gradual retreat, an almost imperceptible shift in vibrational density. Harris noted that in historical retellings, the disappearance of the star became mythologized, often interpreted as divine mystery or symbolic closure. Zorian, however, emphasized the practical and necessary nature of the event. The signal's withdrawal was a protective measure, a tactical retreat designed to preserve the integrity of the anchoring process, while minimizing the risk of cognitive contamination or social upheaval. Zorian observed the response of the surrounding environment. Animals remained unusually calm. Fields and dwellings carried traces of coherent energy, and the human participants exhibited residual states of heightened awareness. Subtle but measurable, these effects lingered because the anchoring had succeeded. The star's primary role was complete. The withdrawal ensured that subsequent activity, both human and natural, could occur without interference from excessive attention or misaligned energetic signals. Harris reflected on the fragility of such coherence, how even minor visibility could introduce chaotic variables, destabilizing the very alignment that had been painstakingly established. The Magi's understanding of the withdrawal was intuitive rather than verbal. They adjusted their journey with awareness, recognizing that the signal's function was ongoing even as it became imperceptible. Zorian explained that this pattern of appearance and withdrawal was observed across other planetary events, a method repeated by advanced observers to anchor consciousness without compromising local autonomy. The star's temporary visibility was always the minimum required to trigger recognition and action, then retracted once purpose was achieved. Harris considered how human storytelling obscured this logic, transforming the star into a symbol of wonder rather than a functional instrument of coherence. Zorian's account reframed it as a measured interaction between observer and environment, a precise calibration of energetic mechanics that relied on timing, perception, and subtle modulation. The star had never been a spectacle for adoration or prophecy. It was a tool, a signal, a silent operator withdrawing when its role was fulfilled, leaving behind the nascent anchor, invisible yet potent, prepared to influence the unfolding patterns of consciousness across generations, unseen by history but eternally documented by the one who watched. Zorian recorded the lesson embedded in the event, a principle far beyond legend and far more subtle than ritual. Harris reflected on the nature of the demonstration. The birth had never been meant to inspire devotion to a figure, but to illuminate a possibility within human consciousness, a pattern for harmonizing awareness, emotion, and presence. The signal, the alignment of the Magi, the coherence of Miriam, the grounding influence of Yosef, and the controlled withdrawal of the star all converged to show that humanity could participate consciously in events that were normally invisible to perception, that the mind and nervous system could respond to frequencies of intention and resonance without the need for divine intermediaries. The lesson was layered, designed to reach those who were prepared to perceive. Zorian noted that humans rarely understood direct demonstration. Most required narrative, metaphor, and ritual to interpret experience. In this case, the demonstration was literal yet subtle, measurable yet hidden. The anchor established a template for human potential, showing that life itself could carry coherence, that even in the smallest and most ordinary circumstances, the organization of consciousness could have far-reaching effects. Harris emphasized that this was not an abstract idea or philosophical speculation. It was a tangible, observable phenomenon, documented by Zorian in precise, energetic, and neurological terms. The Magi, in following the signal, became participants in a system of conscious recognition, their choices directly influencing the safety and success of the anchoring. The animal's behavior, the stability of the immediate environment, and the unspoken clarity between the human guardians and the infant formed a network of coherence that could be observed and learned from. Zorian highlighted that this was not about miracles or magic, but the predictable response of conscious systems attuned to high-frequency information. The birth of Yeshua, the alignment of perception, and the preservation of autonomy all existed to illustrate what humanity could achieve when it aligned attention, understanding, and intention with subtle signals in the environment. Harris reflected on how centuries of storytelling obscured this understanding. Humanity had reduced the event to symbols, icons, and doctrines, losing sight of the mechanics and the lesson of coherence. Zorion emphasized that recognition, not worship, was the purpose. Observing the alignment, understanding its effects, and reflecting on the implications was the intended path. The birth demonstrated that consciousness could be an active participant in shaping reality, that human systems could resonate with precise frequencies without needing to comprehend the entirety of the mechanism. This lesson, though largely invisible, had a persistent influence. It created subtle shifts in the potential of human perception, leaving traces in instinct, intuition, and observation. Harris noted that this was the true teaching, a map of possibility, a demonstration that humans could anchor coherence, recognize signals, and respond consciously. Zorion's documentation ensured that this knowledge survived in principle, even if obscured by myth. The event was not a story about a single child, but a guide for all who could perceive. A demonstration that human consciousness, when aligned and coherent, could resonate with forces beyond ordinary understanding and unlock potential that was otherwise dormant, waiting silently for those willing to see. Harris observed that what humans remembered was not the event itself but a story rewritten over centuries. Zorion recorded the meticulous process by which nuance was stripped away, precision replaced by allegory, and the functional reality of coherence transformed into ritualized mystery. The birth, once an empirical demonstration of potential, became layered with symbols that obscured observation and replaced insight with dogma. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh shifted from stabilizing tools to offerings of devotion. The withdrawal of the star was no longer seen as a controlled modulation, but as a miraculous disappearance. Each element, originally designed to maintain energetic integrity and preserve autonomy, was abstracted into metaphor, legend, and eventually institutionalized religion. Harris noted that the transformation of the story was neither accidental nor malicious. Those who recorded, interpreted, and transmitted the narrative were constrained by the limits of perception, culture, and social authority. Zorion explained that human systems tend to reduce complexity into digestible forms. Any account that directly challenged hierarchy, revealed latent abilities, or demonstrated autonomous human influence over subtle frequencies risked being ignored, suppressed, or reshaped. The original events were inherently destabilizing to power structures. A narrative that suggested humans could consciously participate in resonance, alignment, and coherence without divine intervention was dangerously destabilizing, a truth too difficult for conventional governance to accommodate. Over time, the details became codified. Observers replaced witnesses. Measurements became miracles. The Magi were mythologized into kings, their expertise erased, their empirical journey recast as homage. The animals' reactions became signs of divine presence rather than physiological synchronization to coherent frequencies. Zorion documented these shifts with detached precision, noting how the survival of the story depended on its adaptability to human expectation rather than fidelity to occurrence. Harris reflected on the irony that in attempting to preserve memory, humanity had obscured the very lesson the event intended to teach. What remained was veneration, awe, and fear, not insight, pattern recognition, or the potential to apply coherence in daily life. The rewriting also imposed moral frames alien to the original process. Heroism replaced observation, prophecy replaced recognition, and authority replaced autonomy. Humans could no longer access the subtle template of conscious resonance. Yet, Zorion observed traces remained, hidden in intuition, dreams, and unaccountable insight. Those sensitive enough could detect the underlying pattern, even if distorted. Harris noted that the story's obfuscation was total yet incomplete, leaving fragments of understanding scattered across generations, waiting for those willing to perceive beyond ritual and symbol. The lesson, once practical and observable, became aspirational and abstract. Zorian emphasized that this was a universal pattern. Events of high-frequency coherence always risked reinterpretation when transmitted through human culture. Harris reflected that to recover the true teaching required a willingness to abandon assumptions, to read history not as a repository of faith, but as a map of possibility, and to recognize that process and technology, not miracles, had always been the agents of transformation. The rewriting was complete, yet imperfect. A paradox that preserved mystery while hiding method, leaving humans with awe but not understanding, and Zorian with a record of what had truly unfolded for anyone patient and attentive enough to discern it. Harris considered Zorian's words carefully, realizing that the story of 2,000 years ago was not merely historical but cyclical. The same energetic principles, the same patterns of coherence, were appearing again, though subtler, harder to detect, hidden within the minds and hearts of ordinary humans. Zorian explained that these signals manifested as clarity, sudden insight, and moments of synchrony that could be measured only by those attuned to resonance. Unlike before, the phenomenon was distributed, decentralized, and unpredictable, appearing not as a single luminous point in the sky but as scattered ripples across human consciousness. The magi of the modern era were not three figures in flowing robes, but individuals sensitive to frequency, capable of noticing alignment where others saw coincidence. Zorian emphasized that these ripples carried the same signature as the original event, a coherent field anchoring potential, guiding development, and subtly expanding perception. Where 2,000 years ago, the coherence required isolation, humility, and concealment. Now the threshold demanded vigilance, self-awareness, and courage to act against cultural inertia. Human civilization, Zorian noted, had grown denser with information, distraction, and emotional noise, making the detection and stabilization of these signals more challenging but not impossible. Harris reflected on what this meant for everyday life. Moments of profound insight, sudden creative breakthroughs, and inexplicable connections were not accidents. They were echoes of the ancient template, evidence that the human nervous system, collective or individual, could still participate in coherence if properly guided. Zorian observed that most people dismiss these occurrences as luck or coincidence, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Whenever someone aligned with the frequency, subtle shifts occurred in their environment, influencing others, accelerating recognition, and preserving autonomy. The underlying law was simple but nearly invisible. Consciousness itself was capable of generating stability and transformation, if nurtured rather than suppressed. Zorian warned that with each generation, the capacity for resonance had become more diluted, clouded by fear, distraction, and obedience to authority rather than alignment with pattern. Yet, pockets remained. Harris understood that these were not miracles in the traditional sense, but measurable, teachable, repeatable phenomena. Humanity was at a choice point. Some would recognize the pattern, consciously participate, and accelerate their development. Others would continue to interpret it as randomness, superstition, or myth, leaving potential dormant. The outcome was uncertain, dependent on attention, courage, and willingness to suspend conventional belief. Harris noted the subtlety of Zorian's observation. The pattern was appearing first in the overlooked, the marginalized, the quietly perceptive. Not the powerful or celebrated, but those whose internal states allowed resonance to be registered and sustained. This implied that the coming threshold was not a spectacle but an intimate process, unfolding in countless personal arenas simultaneously, invisible to most, yet capable of restructuring reality at scale. Humanity was being offered a second chance at understanding the mechanics of transformation. Yet most would not recognize the opportunity. Zorian's warning was clear. The repetition was happening now. The template was active, and those attuned could witness, participate, and perhaps finally internalize the truth that had been obscured for millennia. Harris listened as Zorian's voice, calm but deliberate, traced the contours of a new reality. There would be no star, no singular point of focus that could be measured by instruments or marveled at from afar. The coherence would arise within, subtle and quiet, unnoticed by the casual observer. Zorian explained that the mechanism had shifted. Whereas the event 2,000 years ago required a luminous anchor in the sky to stabilize consciousness, the threshold now relied entirely on the latent capabilities of human awareness. The signal was present, but it was internal, encoded in perception, intuition, and emotional alignment. Those who ignored it would never know it existed, yet it could transform those willing to notice. Harris considered the implications. Without external spectacle, the risk of misinterpretation was high. Humanity had been conditioned to look outward for validation, to seek miracles that could be measured and reported. Now the only measure was subtle resonance, an internal confirmation of alignment with the underlying field. Zorian emphasized that recognition was no longer a function of position, power, or fame. It arose in the quiet, in the moments of attention, when a person paused long enough to notice coherence in thought, feeling, or environment. Even the most ordinary act could become a vector of the signal if carried with awareness. The absence of observers changed the nature of responsibility. 2,000 years ago, the Magi acted as intermediaries, interpreters of the signal, their presence amplifying and protecting coherence. Now the field relied entirely on individual choice. Each person encountering the subtle frequency would face a decision: to acknowledge and align, or to dismiss and remain in habitual dissonance. The consequences were profound yet invisible. Alignment propagated quietly, expanding into the surrounding network of consciousness without spectacle or ceremony. Disregard left potential dormant, waiting for someone else to awaken it. The pattern repeated, but this time without instruction, without guidance, without fanfare. Harris noted the paradox. The lack of a star made the signal both more potent and more precarious. It could no longer be distorted by the interpretations of intermediaries, but it could be missed entirely. Zorian explained that this shift was intentional. Humanity had grown to a level of collective complexity, where reliance on external markers would introduce error, distortion, and interference. The integrity of the coherence required that recognition be intimate, personal, and voluntary. Those attuned would perceive subtle alignments in thought, emotion, and circumstance. They would sense the presence of potential without understanding its source. Yet this recognition alone would initiate the amplification necessary for systemic change. Harris realized that the challenge was entirely different. The magic of the past was replaced by responsibility in the present. There would be no crowd, no ceremony, no external verification. Each person was now their own witness, their own magi, their own instrument of resonance. The universe had withdrawn the external star, leaving only the internal beacon. Those who found it would carry the signal forward, altering consciousness not through spectacle, but through alignment, awareness, and deliberate choice. Zorian's observation was clear and uncompromising. The opportunity was present, yet unseen by most. Recognition required courage, attention, and a willingness to trust what could not be observed by the eyes, measured by the instruments, or validated by tradition. It existed only in the quiet, the subtle, the internal. Harris felt the weight of Zorian's final words settle around him, not like a conclusion, but like a door opening into a room he had always known existed but had never entered. Yeshua was not the exception. not a singular anomaly to be venerated or emulated from a distance. He was the demonstration of what was latent in every human consciousness, a proof that coherence could anchor itself in fragile form and radiate outward. The narrative that had been taught for millennia had framed it as divine intervention, a miracle bestowed from without. Yet Zorion revealed it as a pattern, a template, a living map of human potential. Waiting for a savior had never been necessary, because the capability had always existed within. The story was never about expectation. It was about remembering. Harris contemplated the irony. Humanity had spent centuries searching, hoping, and praying for rescue, while the instructions, the technology, the process, had always been present in subtle form, embedded in consciousness, in perception, in the capacity to notice the resonance when it arose. Zorion emphasized that Yeshua's birth, the star, the magi, the animals, even the obscurity of the event were all scaffolding, designed to stabilize coherence in a chaotic field. Every element served as a guide, a pointer, a signal for those attuned to the patterns of alignment. But the lesson had been obscured under doctrine, myth, and ritual. Humanity had mistaken the representation for the event, the echo for the origin, the shadow for the substance. The revelation was quiet but relentless. Each individual, confronted with choice, now had the potential to instantiate coherence, without ceremony, without intermediaries, without expectation of spectacle. The beacon was no longer in the sky. It was in attention, in alignment, in conscious recognition of subtle order. Zorion's species had observed cycles like this before, watching civilizations miss the point of their own opportunity, distracted by external forms, blind to the internal possibility. This time, the pattern would repeat differently. There would be no star, no visible guide, no prescribed ritual. Recognition depended entirely on the awakening of memory, the recollection of innate capacity. Harris realized that remembering was not intellectual. It was a somatic, emotional, perceptual process. It required trust in what could not be seen or measured by conventional means. Zorion's voice conveyed it gently, almost as a whisper against the vastness of what remained unobserved. The truth had been hidden not to deceive but to protect the integrity of emergence, to ensure that when coherence reappeared, it would be recognized only by those capable of carrying it without collapse. The story, the star, the witness, the example, all were signposts, not masters. The message was simple yet revolutionary. You were never waiting for a savior. The power, the alignment, the signal, and the capacity to transform existed within. Yeshua's life was an invitation to remember. The extraordinary had always been ordinary, hidden only by the limits of human attention and belief. To awaken was not to follow, it was to recall, to see the pattern, to feel the resonance, to recognize the capacity for coherence already present. The waiting ended the moment the memory returned. Harris sat in silence, absorbing the immensity of Zorion's observation, understanding at last that the star had never left, only that humanity had turned its gaze outward instead of inward, and that remembering was the only miracle truly required.